What's going on, everybody? We are live. We are back for the Club and Sub podcast, talking UFC Vegas 66, I believe. It never ends in Vegas. Tonight, we're going to be breaking down
UFC
UFC.
Orlando.
That's correct. I'm going to have to edit that part of the description. I keep forgetting we're in Orlando. UFC Orlando this week. It's going to be a fun card. 15 fights. I'm excited to get into it. As usual, we're brought to you guys by betonline.ag. For a 50% bonus up to your first $1,000 deposit, use the promo code CLUBSUB. Tonight, you got the whole crew back. We had a nice little week off there. Rest, relax, eat turkey, maybe win some money on PFL. You have me, John, at MMA Fox, Luke at SWR_betting, and Lags at Danny_Lags. I'm excited for this card. I think there's a decent amount of spots for betting. It's going to be some really entertaining fights. Luke, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, sometimes we kind of harp and moan about some of these fight night cards, but I think this one's a banger. There's not really one I'm not looking forward to. I mean, there's a couple lopsided ones, but I think a lot of fun style matchups. Things could get some good violence too. So,
yeah, agreed. Lags, what do you think? Anything in particular standing out?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I will add to top that off is I think literally if you just added a title fight to this card, I think it's quality of a pay-per-view, quite frankly.
I think outside of like the last two pay-per-views, it's probably better than most of the pay-per-view cards we've had this year, to be honest, at least on paper. It's funny how that works. How often do we say that and then it really lets us down, and some of these really, really shitty regional level cards end up being, super exciting. But hopefully that won't be this week. 15 fights starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. That is brutal. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. First fight of the night, we got Yasmin Jauregui, I don't know how the Mexicans pronounce it, taking on Estela Nunes. It's a fun fight. Yasmin is a big favorite. Lags, what do you think?
So I think it's Jauregui.
Jauregui, all right.
Jauregui.
Someone knows.
And so, quite frankly, I just don't think much of Nunes. Quite frankly, I just don't think I'm much of her gas tank. I just know she's a huge, huge gasser, and that's just something I just can't really back on. I know Jauregui is just a solid striker overall, solid prospect to look out for. I think it should be a good fight for her, but not looking to lay the chalk, obviously.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, you guys know me. Jauregui's my homegirl. She's my favorite prospect. I was harping about her, debut. I was like, I think I found a little bit of a diamond in the rough or whatever. And then, of course, she wins in this next fight. She's minus 350. So I think people are kind of warming up to that, maybe a little bit. But I do have to be. What's the word I'm looking for? Like candid, honest, something around there. That I don't know if she should be this big of a favorite. Personally, I do think the line is a bit wide, just because I do think Nunes actually is a pretty decent striker. But to Lags' point, she's also a girl that doesn't really manage her energy really efficiently at all. Like, I know we can talk about how she's gotten tired in fights that have had grappling components, which is very true. But even if you go back to the Hughes fight, like, she got tired just based on the fact that she was throwing too much into the shots. But Hughes didn't really do much to gas her, or when she actually like really effectively started to slow through like the early part of that second round. So I just think the girl doesn't know how to manage her energy, but she's reasonably technical at range. I just don't think she's faced anyone on the level of Jauregui striking who's going to come forward, push a pace, bring pressure. I think she's much more physical than Nunes. Obviously, I guess kind of the main talking point for most people is that if Jauregui doesn't wrestle, how does she cover 360 or 300 or whatever? I get it. And I think there's definitely maybe some validity to that. But I guess my point of contention there is I don't think that Nunes is gassy components are reliant solely based on somebody grappling her. But nonetheless, I do think the grappling upside does favor Jauregui in this fight should she decide to go to it at the end of the day. So I also think that Jauregui is probably the more durable party. Jauregui can probably actually break her, maybe finish her, get her out of there late in the third round. So I think it's a decent fight for Jauregui personally, but I mean, I'm not running into the window to lay 300 on it. I think the line's probably directionally correct.
I bet Nunes. I guess I'll preface what I'm going to say by saying I agree with most of the takes on Jauregui as a prospect. I think she's quite a good prospect. Obviously, for all the reasons you mentioned, Luke, and at 23, you'd only expect those attributes to get better. But what I will say is I still think, especially in her striking, is still kind of green. Like she's physical, she throws a lot, but defensively, she's very, very available. That first fight, Jasmine Lucindo, she's an interesting prospect as well and also young, but she's not really known for being a striker. She's more a grappler than anything else. And she was bombing on Jauregui most of that fight, doing nothing but just kind of winging wild hooks. I think Nunes is a considerably better striker than Lucindo is, at least from a technical standpoint. And so I look at this and I kind of think while they're fresh, I think Nunes is more technical. I think she's better defensively, and I think she probably hits a little bit harder. Although Jauregui hits pretty hard herself, so that's harder to say. But like I kind of think the line is where it is because, as we all know, Estela Nunes slows down in every fight, and I think that's fairly likely. My question is, does that deserve minus 300 or even minus 250? And I'm not really sure because I think Nunes is going to walk her onto some really hard shots early in this fight. Do I think she'll finish? No, probably not, but I think it's in play. And, it's not really that hard for me to imagine a scenario where Nunes wins 2 rounds and then is hanging on for dear life late in this fight. I guess for me, Jauregui getting better, being the athlete that she is with the cardio and output, it makes her a warranted favorite, especially with the cardio discrepancy. But given that I think there's actually a skill discrepancy the other way, it's hard for me to put Jauregui past minus 150, especially because this is by far the best striker she's ever fighting or she has fought, I should say, to this point in her career. So I like Nunes. I like her small. Like, again, we all know things could probably snowball pretty fast later in this fight. But for me, I'm willing to take the shot on someone with Nunes' skill at this line, especially against someone who's fairly unlikely to grapple her. Moving on, though, interesting fight. Francis Marshall making his debut off the Contender Series. He's taking on Marcelo Rojo. Luke, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, it's just kind of an interesting fight. Marshall, young guy, 23 years old, only 6 pro fights, hasn't really been tested much. I would say he's looked for his level and for his experience, I think his tape has looked pretty decent, all things considered. He's going to throw strikes on the feet, comes from a wrestling background, shown a little bit of jiu-jitsu acumen as well. But to me, it honestly just kind of seems like a little too convenient of like a take that he's just going to go out here and run Rojo on the mat. I think it's possible, but even I did a pretty deep dive into Rojo. I actually think his first level takedown defense is actually pretty decent. It's not that bad. I think it's more so like guys are kind of able to get to him attritionally, but striking wise, I think Rojo is just a much better striker than Marshall is personally. Like anybody who can go out there and meaning Rojo, and arguably win the first 2 rounds against a guy like Charles Jourdain on short notice, that's pretty impressive to me. And even the guy that Marshall, looked decent again against in the stand-up in his debut was, a jiu-jitsu guy who had never been past like 2 minutes in his whole pro career or something like that. He still hit Marshall 74 times in that fight. So it's like, if that type of guy can hit Marshall as much as he did, and I think Rojo is also much more diverse, but between his kicks, clinch knees, he targets the body. He's got power, aggression, obviously clear finishing upside throughout the course of his career. It's like there's still a lot of questions with this Marshall kid for me, and I think Rojo's going to go out there and give him an honest fight. But obviously the concern is obviously on the floor with the wrestling primarily for me, and maybe a little bit of the gas tank for Rojo. But I think it's a pretty big step up in competition, and we've seen these type of spots pretty much consistently all the time. Guys under 25 or girls under 25 with less than 10 pro fights. Contender Series debut, step up, overvalued, shiny new toy, battle tested, vet comes in and puts on the vet lesson. So confidence isn't high, but I do think Rojo is pretty clearly the value side. And the last thing I'll say is he is going up to 145 for this fight. I think that's actually going to be good for him. I guess he was like cutting 40 pounds to make like 35 and just like killing himself, which could have significantly impacted his cardio. And he's not a small 45 by any means, and he's not going to be like undersized in this matchup at all. Might even actually be bigger, I would say too. So it's pretty clearly a Rojo or pass spot for me.
Rojo fought Jourdain at 45, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was short
But he
notice.
spent
I
the bulk
think.
of his career at 30. He
Yeah.
fought him at 45 because it was 2 weeks notice in his debut. But yeah.
Yeah. I like Rojo a lot here, to be honest. For all the reasons you mentioned, to be honest, I almost even think saying it's a big step up is understating how big a step up it is, to be quite honest. Like, you look at the guys that Francis Marshall fought regionally, they're all absolute the bums of the bums. And to be clear, I don't think Marshall's a bad prospect. I think he's I don't want to say a great prospect, but I think he's shown some interesting skills. Obviously, good cardio, pushes the pace, will grapple. But there was a reason that for some time until the COVID days where we didn't see guys with 5 fights who had only fought bum level regional competition debut in the UFC. The bottom line for me is, like, when I look at Marshall's tape, I see a lot of the same things you do, Luke. You look at the Matthews fight. He did a lot of cool things in that fight, but I mean, his head was there on a platter to be hit the entire fight. He kind of just really cardio and durability bullied Matthews into winning that fight, which, fair play to him. It was an impressive showing, and the cardio was impressive. But at the same time, from a technical level, I don't really think he's there yet on a UFC level. And even in the grappling, you touched on an important point, I think, with Rojo's defensive grappling. I think it's pretty good. Phillips is about 10x the grappler that Marshall is, in my opinion, especially as a submission grappler. And he was having a lot of trouble consolidating position early in that fight, for much of that fight, to be honest. Granted, Marshall's a lot bigger. He's coming down from 55, but I really don't think Marshall is going to have much grappling success, at least early in this fight. And to your point, Rojo fought well against Charles Jourdain. He obviously just lost to Kyler Phillips. He fought two guys, one who's arguably top 10 at 35 and one who is arguably top 15 at 45. And now he's fighting Francis Marshall, who's fought nobody, is very hittable, seems very open to the leg kicks that Rojo likes to throw. To me, I just, unless you have some inside info here and that Marshall has suddenly turned into an elite wrestler who's going to get a ton of control, I don't really know how you can favor him. Maybe he can cardio him down the stretch here. I think that's in play. But I think the bulk of the finishing equities on the Rojo side, I think he's going to be better on minutes. I like Rojo a lot. Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, so we have some dissension here. Not that I have a play on Marshall or anything like that, but I lean more so a little bit on the other side with that attrition, that cardio, that wrestling down the stretch. I like Marshall overall, like a decent prospect. But yeah, Rojo for me, the cardio, the wrestling, not a big fan on that end. So I lean Marshall, but yeah, best of luck to you guys on your bets.
Fair enough. Moving on. I don't know if I want to say this is a cool fight, but it should be a fun fight. We got Natan Levy. He's taking on Gennaro Valdez. Yeah. I bet the under here. I think I have it on minus 155. Honestly, I am like the most anti-juiced under person ever, but even what is it now? About minus 200? Is that what we're looking at?
Let me look. I think it was minus 190 last time I looked, but let me so it's minus 180 on FanDuel to the under 2.5.
I still think that's a pretty good price, to be honest. And the thing is, like, I feel like the market often overvalues the chances of fights going under. But like Gennaro Valdez, this guy is, I mean, he's like a wrecking ball who has no defense whatsoever, can be hurt, can be outgrappled, will come in there swinging 1,000 miles an hour in literally every single fight of his career until his opponent dies or he dies, against Natan Levy, who I wanted to bet Levy, to be honest, like before I taped the fight, because I don't rate Valdez's skill set at all. But Levy just seems so flaky to me. It's unbelievable. Like, he seems kind of fragile. When he gets backed up on the fence, he's there to be cracked. But at the same time, Levy can give it as good as he can get it on the feet. And I think if Levy gets on top, he's got some real chance for a finish here. I don't know. I put this fight to finish in like the 70 to 75% range. I like the under. We'll see if it works out. Lags, what do you think?
Yep, I'm as well on the under. And I am a guy who advocates for juiced unders usually on this podcast. And I would, again, echo your sentiment that at the current price, I think it's a good number. To add on to that point, like Levy doesn't move his head striking either. His hand's pretty low. I think this is definitely, like, while it on paper should be a good spot for Levy, it wouldn't shock me if Valdez cracked him. Like, Levy's there to be hit on the feet, but I think he's got solid wrestling and should be able to find a finish on the mat. So I'm on the under as well, 1.5, 145.
Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you guys broke down the fight well. Like, my personal opinion, I I don't think either of these guys are UFC caliber. I'd be honestly shocked if either made it to a second UFC contract. I really would. I successfully faded Levy in his debut against Rafa Garcia at plus 100, which was honestly probably one of my favorite bets. And then I think the books hung like a really ridiculous number on Valdez and Frivola, the under in that fight. I feel like that was a crazy number too that I was able to hit.
Yeah, that was at 2.5, I believe, because I know I was on that as well.
Yeah, because they set it at 2.5 and not 1.5, and it was like, why are you? But yeah, I mean, I know Levy hasn't been much of a finisher, but to your point, like Valdez is just like so available. Like he's going to be your quote unquote John Agent of Chaos, for better or for worse. And, we have seen Levy hurt guys. He's going to be aggressive on the ground. He'll attack stuff. Valdez is obviously going to be aggressive on the feet. He's going to attack stuff on the ground. Valdez also gets his back taken like all the time. And I do think Levy actually is probably the better grappler here. Both guys have cardio issues, I would say. That third round for Levy against Breeden was really not good. That was a fight he should have really won, honestly, and made that look a lot cleaner than it was. And it honestly really wasn't, going back and watching that hindsight 2020. So I do come away with, leaning Levy, because I do think he is just a bit better of a fighter. But yeah, I think violence is your better way to go.
Yeah, agreed. Moving on, we have an interesting fight that it seems like everybody and their mother is planting a flag on. We got Tracy Cortez taking on Amanda Ribas. Lags, what do you think?
Definitely not one I'd plant my flag on, but I'm more so on the Ribas side, quite frankly. I think in the striking, I think some people might think it's close with Cortez. I think Ribas is a much better striker. And Cortez, I'm not really sold on her control grappling. It's not the best. And in terms of like when she actually gets the fight to the ground, she's not super dangerous. So it's obviously a battle of how long Tracy's going to be able to keep the fight on the mat. And I don't know. I favor Ribas. I don't think she's going to be able to be held down that long. And I favor her in most of the striking exchanges. So Ribas money line. Yeah. I don't hate it.
Luke, how about you?
I guess first, Lags, did you play Ribas?
I did not. No, I guess I shouldn't have said money line at the end there. I guess I shouldn't have said money line, but sorry. But no, I lean on the Ribas side though, but not super passionately.
Well, just based on how you talked about it, though, it sounds like Ribas should probably be like 60% for you, should it not?
It sounded semi-passionate. I'll be honest.
No. The only thing I would add is there's not a ton of data of her being aggressively grappled, and the only fight really was Verna, where she goes 1 of 8 on takedowns and she controls her for 3 minutes. So it's like Tracy could come out here and wrestle her and get her down easily. There's just not a huge data side. So yeah,
I know. I'm just giving you shit, but
I know.
Yeah, to me, it's honestly a fight I've kind of like ping-ponged back and forth on. I am kind of a part of the general opinion, though. I mean, Cortez's win equity in this fight is to probably accrue 8 to 9 minutes of top time. I guess really where the crux of, the MMA Twitter war this week is, can she do that or not? And I lean to the side of yes, just because of the Verna fight, and she has played guard in a few other scenarios. And I would say that Cortez is a much better pure wrestler than Verna Jandiroba, who's more of a jiu-jitsu judo girl type. So I think there's that, coupled with Cortez obviously not being like lengthwise or like stature like wise much bigger than Ribas, but she's a thick girl, man, and she's a 125 who ain't making 115 unless you cut off her ass, right? Where I mean, Ribas, she is a strawweight. She hasn't missed at 115 yet, so I still kind of question what her overall reasoning is for staying at 125. But it's just a fight where I do think that physicality kind of probably comes into play. I do think Cortez probably grinds her out. But to your point, I do think it's actually pretty one-way traffic on the feet for Ribas. I really don't rate Cortez's striking much at all. She's pretty robotic, even in some of the girls she's fought in the limited times the fights have been on the feet. Like Justine Kish had a ton of success. Vanessa Mello had a lot of early success in the first round. Like it just hasn't been overtly pretty, and Ribas is going to come forward, throw strikes. I know she's the better jiu-jitsu girl, and I theoretically she could sub her, I guess. But from what I saw, at least like in the posturing in the fight against Gatto, like she did everything largely right outside of getting her back taken a couple times, which is obviously a concern as well. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think it's one of those fights where it could be a split decision type of fight, or either girl could honestly look minus 200. So if you do have a stronger opinion on either side, I mean, I think you probably should be playing it, because I think whoever wins in probably most scenarios probably does exceed value. But for me, I don't have a great read on it, so I'll pass for me.
Yeah, I more or less come down where you do. And it's funny because you and I, Luke, were talking about this the other night. I'm like, I wanted to bet Cortez against Gatto and had a feeling it was going to go exactly the way it did. But I didn't, because I was a pussy. And then you look at this fight, though, and I feel the problem is I feel almost exactly like you do. The thing is, like, I lean to the Cortez side. I am inclined to believe she can get 2 to 3 takedowns here. And I think she can control her if she gets them. The problem is you look at the tail risk on each side here. It's pretty wide, right? Because if it turns out, I'm with you guys completely. Like, if it turns out Cortez can't get easy takedowns, she is giga fucked, in my opinion. Like, could she crack Ribas? I guess. But I really don't think that's at all likely outcome. And on the other side, I feel pretty good about if Cortez gets on top of her, she can hold her down. Like, in my personal opinion, first of all, Gato is a much bigger woman, and I think a lot stronger than Cortez, and probably more or than Ribas, and more danger. I think she has more dangerous guard, in my opinion, and she dealt with that pretty well on top. And so I'm inclined to think she won't have too many issues holding Ribas down if she gets there. But I'm not like super confident she can get her down, you know? And so with that being the case, like, I don't really want to make a bet on someone at minus 110 and then look back and be like, wow, I bet someone at 50% implied who was really about 20%. You know, I think like that's one of the worst feelings in the world. And I just don't have a strong enough like feeling on it. I actually think Ribas has pretty strong hips. But to your point, Luke, and this is the thing why this is why I just couldn't bet Ribas in general. I don't understand the strawweight thing or the strawweight to flyweight thing, especially because strawweight is pretty wide open right now near the top. Whereas flyweight, it's like, is Ribas going to beat Tyler Santos or Valentina? Like, I don't.
And she's winning fights at flyweight or at 115. So
right.
It's like...
I honestly think she took the Chuk fight to try to get like cheat her way into a title fight, but like I don't get it. And Tracy's a big girl, man. Like, she was fighting Stephanie Egger, who is a giant and used to fight or does fight at 35, and tossing her around like a sack of potatoes. So yeah, I'm passing it, but I think I could only bet Cortez personally.
That's another thing, like what you just mentioned too. The fight doesn't make a ton of sense though. Like, why? It's like Chuk to Cortez. It's like.
Yeah, I don't understand what they're doing here, to be completely honest, or what anybody is doing here. Moving on, though, we got Darren the Damage Elkins taking on Jonathan Pearce. It's a fun fight. Pearce is a huge favorite. Luke, what do you think? Is the Damage live?
It's such a weird fight because, like, on paper, there's actually a ton of parallels between both. Like, yeah. And so you just look at the line and you're like, well, you know, I don't know. And honestly, I do come away with saying I do think the line is wide personally, just because, like, skill for skill, I don't think like Pearce is like 80% skill for skill against, like, you look at the entire career of Darren Elkins and the entire career of Jonathan Pearce, you put them together, it's like, I don't really know how you come away with 80%. Obviously, Elkins, 38 now, has taken a ton of damage, as, you know, per his you know, nickname and moniker and whatnot. But like I said, even like in his, like, Elkins' like recent wins, they're not really impressive. Like Jauregui, I didn't honestly like what I saw in the first round from Elkins against Minner. He was actually losing wrestling exchanges against Derek Minner. Obviously, we know Minner is going to go crazy in the first round. That's going to be his best round. But as someone who bet Elkins there, I was like, bro, why are we making this first round even greasier than it should be? Like, why are we losing some scrambles and positions to you know, Derek Minner? And then, you know, Tristan Connolly more recently too, obviously got dusted by Swanson. So there's that. I ultimately just kind of come away with saying that Pearce is a bigger better, more youthful version of Darren Elkins in the better part of his career right now. That's ultimately kind of where I come down with it. But, you know, I still don't think that, you know, a fight against Christian Rodriguez for Pearce can be, you know, completely ignored, right? Like, he was able to get into some positions. Americani, you know, definitely gave him some issues early. So it hasn't been like all roses, you know, for Jonathan Pearce. He is still pretty much has no defense on the feet. That needs to be noted. Was knocked out by Joe Lozon, which isn't necessarily the greatest look. So I do come away with saying that the line is wide, but it's just really hard for me to back Darren Elkins in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I am. Like, if this fight happens 2 years ago, I definitely bet Elkins. But I bet him against Connolly, and I thought he covered his price, but he looked old to me. Like, it was a bit sweatier than it needed to be. Like Elkins is even not past his prime. Like, 35-year-old Elkins just owns Connolly. Like, not even really a hard fight for him. Not that it was like a hard fight, but, you know, Connolly provided more resistance than I expected. But to your point, Luke, you know, the thing that I keep coming back to is the Christian Rodriguez fight. Because, I mean, Rodriguez is a decent talent, but the way he was able to kind of just initiate scrambles while Pearce was in dominant positions makes me think Elkins is going to be able to do the same, probably more effectively than Rodriguez does. Does that mean I think he wins the fight? Not necessarily, because I do think I actually rate Pearce's wrestling a lot. I think he's a great wrestler, to be honest. It's so hard for me to watch that fight and think Elkins won't be able to initiate the same scrambles and get a fair amount of control time himself. And even on the feet, this is like the rare fight where it's like, I think Pearce hits harder, but I mean, Pearce is a punching bag himself standing. So I expect these guys to grapple hard. I do think Elkins is fading, so I'm not betting him here. I actually like the over quite a bit. You know, Pearce has thrown ground and pound at times, but if you actually watch the Rodriguez fight, he threw almost no ground and pound at all while Rodriguez was initiating scrambles in that fight. And so I kind of think while they're grappling, if someone's going to get finished, it's very likely going to be a sub to me. Like, I just don't, you know, even Minner was struggling to get positions to land ground and pound. I don't think you're going to have a situation where he's got back mount on Darren Elkins and is raining down ground and pound there. Like, Mirsad Bektic couldn't finish this guy on the mat. I think Jonathan Pearce is going to. Maybe. I actually kind of think a ground finish is almost more likely Pearce sticking his head in the guillotine. You know, he did that a couple of times against Rodriguez. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to bet the over here. It might be sweaty. I know it's a bit contrarian, but I actually think it should be closer to like 60%, to be honest. Lags, what do you think?
Well, so two things. So first, funny, Luke, actually how you finished your breakdown. That's actually how I was coming into this fight as well. Like saying on the Pearce side, I was like, he's the younger, more athletic, more durable fighter of the two. So slightly different characteristics there. But and then the second of the two is I'm on the under here. But yeah, but yeah, small play on the under here, minus 125. But yeah, I do think that Pearce in the grappling exchanges could find a finish here and could break a slowly fading Darren Elkins.
Darren Elkins doesn't get broken legs; he breaks people. Understand that.
We shall see. We shall see.
But honestly, like, these are like probably two of like my favorite fighters in the UFC. It's kind of a tragedy that they're fighting each other. I really just hope it doesn't end as violently for Elkins when it does end as I think it's going to end.
Well, I feel like John, if you're betting the over, you got to bet Elkins here. Come on.
Nah, dude, I just think Pearce is too good a wrestler, man. Like, it's, you know, I don't know. I've thought about it, but moving on though. Another good fight here. We got Michael Johnson taking on Mark Diakiese. Luke, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of both guys. I know Diakiese is like everybody's darling right now. I've never been a Mark Diakiese guy personally. I still think as much as Michael Johnson is a head case, I think Mark Diakiese is honestly still a head case. He's been an extremely inconsistent fighter throughout the course of his career. Sometimes he wrestles, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he throws strikes, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he's this big monster explosive athlete. Sometimes he just doesn't do much, you know. Obviously, we're seeing a much better version of Diakiese right now. It's just, I come away with saying, I guess he could clock Johnson, but from a striking perspective, at least. But it's like, if he's going to be on the feet, if he's going to be tempted, Mark Diakiese, I don't know how anybody can say that the striking is not close. I mean, the last two guys that knocked out Michael Johnson were Josh Emmett and Justin Gaethje, who are two of the biggest hitters in their respective divisions. So we can say about, what we want about the flakiness of Johnson, but it hasn't really come from a power standpoint by any means. And that Emmett knockout was like late in the third round as well. Michael Johnson, in my opinion, still has some of the best boxing in the UFC. He's fast, he's quick, he's crisp. So if Mark doesn't go out here and D1 Diakiese Johnson, I think this fight could play a lot closer than odds indicate. But we were kind of going back and forth on this one in the group chat too, John, about it. And I did do some more back in Michael Johnson. Honestly, the big concern with me for him is honestly the Clay Guida fight. Like, he did get wrestled through 3 rounds by Clay Guida. Obviously, Guida's a good wrestler, no doubt about it. But like, the problem I had there was like, he kind of just, once the going got tough there, he kind of like succumbed to the wrestling. And if Mark goes out here and shoots a ton of takedowns again, you could definitely very well see a very similar scenario, just because Michael Johnson is obviously not the most, let's say, durable fighter, but he's just kind of flaky, right? Stuff's always, even if you look at a lot of his losses, like, he's actually doing reasonably well. And a lot of, like, very few guys have just like went out there and just blown the doors off of Michael Johnson, pillar to post, striking or wrestling wise. Like, it's rarely happened. But you just kind of had that flakiness with him. He's older. So yeah, that's what my concern is. But I do want to note, though, I mean, at least the last two guys, the Diakieses, just ran into the mat from a wrestling perspective, in Hadzovich and Homeboy. I mean, just are horrible defensive wrestlers at the end of the day. Michael Johnson still stuffs at like 79%. He's not a guy that just like really tips over from TDAs by any means. So I don't think it's like a foregone conclusion that Diakiese just runs him into the mat. And if he doesn't, I think this fight could be competitive. So it's completely a dog or pass situation for me, but I actually like the over here. Diakiese just doesn't attempt submissions. Michael Johnson's tough to knock out. I know Johnson's got a couple knockdowns in his last 2. Diakiese's been dinged a couple times, but by and large, I don't think this fight really should finish at much of a rate. You're more so just kind of with a little bit of the flakiness of both guys, which is why it's a small play for me. But I do like the over here.
Yeah, so like, I bet Diakiese at like minus 225. I capped him at like minus 350, but like, I don't know that I would play him at minus 300 at this point. I think the meat on the bone is pretty thin. I don't really disagree with a lot of what you said, Luke. I guess for me, like, first of all, it's like, for context, no. Do I think he can have the kind of success he had against Borshev and Hadzovich? I mean, they are probably the 2 worst wrestlers in the entire division, to be honest. So no. But what I do think is, look, Johnson does have pretty good first level takedown defense. Even today, it's still, pretty good. I mean, he's got strong hips. The problem for Johnson is a couple fold. First of all, he's old, obviously. And to me, I think there's been pretty clear declines in Johnson's game. The Guida fight, as you touched on, but then it's like, even the Lobov fight, yeah, he won it clear 29-28, but it's like Artem Lobov was having way too much success striking with him. Like, peak Artem Lobov does not survive 5 minutes, or peak Michael Johnson, Artem Lobov does not survive 5 minutes in that fight. I just think all parts of his game are starting to deteriorate here at a bit of a clip. It's like, even the Malarkey fight, I almost think he's getting more credit than he deserves for almost winning that fight. Like, I came on here and said on this podcast, I'm like, oh, I bet Johnson in that fight. And I was like, oh, if he can keep the standing, he's going to fuck Malarkey up. Jamie Malarkey should not have been a tough fight for Michael Johnson. Like, Michael Johnson at his peak was a very good striker. Jamie Malarkey is just a big zombie who throws a lot of strikes and has no defense. And yet he won a strike. Now, should he have won it? That's a different story. But again, it was still a fight where he outlanded Johnson by 30 strikes. So I guess my larger point is, I think Johnson's game's deteriorating. Do I think Diakiese gets takedowns easily? Probably not early. My problem with Johnson is, though, it's like, once he ends up on his back, it's like, keeping the fight upright he's pretty good at. Once he ends up on bottom, though, it's like, as you touched on, Luke, he almost just kind of like gives up there. You saw it late in the Stevie Ray fight. That was a fight he was cruising in, and then suddenly he ends up on his back on Stevie Ray, who I guess, has a decent jiu-jitsu game, but he has not kind of a serious top game. And he looked like Khabib smashing him on top in that fight. And I do think, while I agree Diakiese's a head case, it's like if he continues to attempt takedowns at the rate he's doing it, it's like, no, he may not be the best wrestler in the world. I'd say he's about average. But at 10 to 15 takedowns, if you figure he gets 3 to 4 against Johnson, I think you just have to assign him like 6 to 8 minutes of control. And to me, I don't think you can, with that dynamic, and I kind of agree with you about the over. Like, I don't think either side is super likely to finish. Like, Johnson, historically very durable. Diakiese was able to hold up under a storm from Disease and never really get close to getting put out. I think you just have to give Diakiese a massive advantage on minutes here. Look, you asked me the other night, like, if I think Johnson stops every takedown, would I feel good? No, I would not. I would not feel good about it if you tell me it's a 15-minute striking match. But I think that's probably competitive, I guess, is my point. And I actually feel pretty good about Diakiese eventually getting takedowns. And like, look, as we've talked about in this podcast many times, guys with good cardio who can attempt takedowns over and over and over again is, in its own aspect, kind of a cheat code here. So I just think, I think minus 300 to 350 is fine. I think Diakiese's going to attempt a lot of takedowns. And I think he's very likely to get a fair amount. Will he get 10? Probably not. But I think 3 to 5 is fair, given how he performed against Lando and Duffy doing the same thing. So I think Diakiese should be a big favorite. I think he's a relatively smart fighter. My biggest fear in this fight is him just getting clipped by something early and then just getting scared and kind of withdrawing into a shell like he did against Nasrat. But I think short of that, he has all the tools here. Lags, what do you think?
Yep, I'm on board with you as well, John. I lean in this case. I think he should be a big favorite as well, and I think he should have no issue in the grappling. From a guy who did bet Diakiese by sub against Hadzovic, I would I would at 14 to 1 against like we all touched on, one of the worst grapplers in the division. I would definitely echo that sentiment on the over. So yeah, that's all I got to say about that.
Luke, what did you get it at? Like minus 200?
Yeah, like 200, 210 or something like that.
That's where it's at right now, I think.
Roughly. I think it should be closer to probably like minus 300 personally.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, even on the feed, is either guy like very likely to hurt the other? I don't really think so, honestly.
It's like, like I said, there's just some points like with obviously the Alves fight where he got club and subbed. Diakiese got dinged there. There's been a couple other fights where, like I said, that's why it's actually a reasonably small play for me. Just like I said, with the flakiness of Johnson, and Diakiese has been hurt before, but yeah, I think it should go over still at a decent clip.
Yeah, fair. Moving on, though. Speaking of Clay Guida, we got Clay Guida. He's taking on Scott Hot Sauce Holtzman here. I actually bet Holtzman a bit before we came on the show. I think I got minus 155, I want to say, or minus 150. But, yeah, my biggest concern in this fight for Holtzman is really just the two absolute ass-kickings he took in his last two fights to Mateusz Gamrot and Beneil Dariush. But I think just putting those names out there kind of speaks volumes with regard to, where this fight is. It's like those two guys both just fought top 10 at lightweight. This is just a very, very different fight. Even looking at, so it's like I look at this on the feet and it's like I think Holtzman, he's got better volume. He's a much bigger hitter in my opinion. And so it's like, can Guida wrestle him? I mean, Gamrot couldn't really control him on the mat. Dariush couldn't really control him on the mat. So it's like maybe Guida could do what Lentz did and hold him against the cage for a bit. But even that fight, I think I thought Holtzman won that fight personally. And I don't think Guida is nearly as durable as Lentz is. Guida's also been a bit less willing to kind of go to that hardcore wrestling approach in recent years. We saw, I think we all, or I did, I bet him huge against Madsen, and we saw Guida just basically completely softcock in round 3 of that fight and just let Madsen jab him and lose a decision. Yeah, I mean, I think you just look at the fight and it's like, what is Guida's upside here? I guess Guida could knock him out if Holtzman's chin is dust. But it's like Holtzman fought 2 years ago was the last time he got knocked out. It's not like he's jumping in here 3 months after the Gamrot fight. So I kind of trust him. He's been a historically durable guy. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt here to a degree. And with that being the case, Guida can get hurt. We see it all the time. He can get guillotined. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets hurt club and sub here. I think Holtzman's got the volume upside. I think he's got the power upside. I think Guida's best case is kind of wall installing him a bit. I don't know. I think Holtzman should be like minus 200 range. And honestly, if this was like pre those knockouts, I'd probably make him an even bigger favorite just because of, in my opinion, how stylistically poor a matchup it is for Guida. What do you think, Legs?
Definitely one of the weirder fights on the card, I feel like. To me, I kind of just come down to like thinking the line's broadly about right. You know, for me, also the near 2-year-long layoff for Holtzman's not ideal either. But that's really about it. I mean, I think he schools him on the feet. And like you said, really comes down to whether or not Guida is going to be able to wrestle him. And I don't really, I kind of just struggle to see him landing more than maybe one takedown. I don't think he's going to be able to control him at all. So, yeah, I think it should be a good fight for Holtzman.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, I came pretty close to betting Holtzman, but the two things that ultimately kept me off was, well, I should say three. One, the layoff, two, the age, and three was the Nick Lentz fight. Honestly, that's kind of what's keeping me off here. But to your point, you know, if Clay is not proactively wrestling in this fight, I think Holtzman is going to look like a pretty good bet. Guida historically not much of a pure power threat. And I would say probably the big difference, you know, with Holtzman even getting knocked out by Dariush and Gamrot, despite obviously both those guys being top 15 fighters, both of those guys are just like much faster. I would say that the speed gap was very wide in those fights. So I think Holtzman should probably cleanly win the striking, and I think his general takedown defense and get up game has been good. It's just he does get stuck against the fence at points, and if Guida's just going to be relentless, grindy, or you know, type of Clay Guida guy, you know, I can see this fight playing very, very close. And coupled with the fact, like even on the feet, like despite me, you know, favoring Holtzman by a decent amount, like if Guida just like is continuously like circling the outside and Holtzman is just like going forward like a berserker trying to swing those combo shots, and like Guida's just like hair going all over and is just the energizer bunny for 15 minutes, and Holtzman's just, he can't track him down. Like that's possible too. I wouldn't say that's out of the realm of possibility. Now, how much effective offense is, you know, Clay going to be able to get off standing? You know, I don't necessarily know, but that's possible too. But at the end of the day, man, it's two just old fucking guys. Like I don't know. I'm good, but I do think it actually is a favorite or pass situation.
Moving on, we got Angela Hill, Emily Ducote. I know you and I disagree on this fight, Luke. Do you want to take the first crack at it, or do you want me to, and you want to rebut here?
Or I can go first, and then you guys can have at it.
Yeah, I guess the legs go first.
Yes. I'm actually, I guess more in between. I don't have really too much of a passionate take, but I end up more so on the Ducote side. You know, I think she's a solid prospect. I think she's got good volume striking. But where I guess my issue is playing her here, pretty big jump up and step up in competition, obviously in terms of just striking alone from Jessica Penne. And yeah, ultimately I think it is a close fight. So not nothing I'm clamoring to play.
All right, Luke, you want to take the shot at it, or you want me to go?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess I'll preface by saying I'm probably just renowned to lose money on another Angela Hill. So I'll start at the top. You know, even though I think in probably like 75% of the scenarios I've made excellent bets, it's just they never come through for me. But you know, back to the well we go again. I haven't played anything yet, just because I was kind of seeing to where the line might shake out, and it's kind of ping-ponged a little bit, at least in multiple points throughout the week. But I like both girls at the end of the day. I like Ducote. Generally, I'm glad she's finally got to the UFC. I think she deserves to be here. I thought she put on an excellent performance against Penne in her debut, but ultimately where I come down with, and just as someone who has watched Invicta, over the last 3 to 4 years, I was pretty familiar with her before she ever even came to the UFC. If you just, I don't want to sound like I'm wiki capping it, but I do think it is like somewhat important here. Like the girls that she has beaten over her entire career have all been girls who I would classify as non-UFC caliber strikers, not even at a low tier, in my opinion. I don't think Jessica Penne, at least at distance, is not a UFC quote unquote caliber striker. She's good at in the clinch, but she doesn't know how to use her range effectively, because that was kind of a big talking point even for me going into that Panay and Ducote fight where it's like, okay, well, yeah, Panay's bigger, but like, is she going to be able to utilize that or not utilize that? She still definitely hit Ducote a decent amount in the fight too, but Panay is just so hittable. And, she fights a girl in Zabatella who they call the half pint because she is a just small little drink of water, 105 wrestler, not a striker by any means. Danielle Taylor, 5 feet tall, circles the outside, decides not to engage and really do anything, got cut from the UFC. Juliana Lima is now playing bingo in Minas Gerais, Brazil at 40 years old, getting close to getting a discount at the car wash. Kanako Murata, short, stocky Japanese wrestler. Janessa Morangian, stocky Muay Thai girl who turned out to be an absolute complete bust. Pop Rocky, Contender Series, lost, is now 3-3 as a pro. And even her run in Bellator, she's fighting primary grapplers at the end of the day too. So Angela Hill is just so much better of a striker than any girl Emily Ducote has fought. I understand that Ducote's striking has gotten better, but like technically, ultimately, what I come away with saying is that Ducote's very static, flat-footed, stationary. She's technically, I think, pretty decent, but Angela Hill is a girl who is always going to be on her bike. She's always going to be moving. She's going to be throwing from different angles. She's definitely hittable, even in doing so. I'm not saying she's not. But she's not going to sit there and just stand in front of Ducote, which I think the majority of girls have largely, done and just not been on the level of Angela Hill, or who are going to throw the amount of volume that Angela Hill is going to as well. And I know people talk about like how Hill's 37 now. She's like 14-12 or whatever the case may be, but it's like, she's still shown she can compete with really good girls on the feet at the end, really outside of the Torres complete mollywhopping. But we know Torres is extremely aggressive and is just going to relentlessly go forward and do things. Competed with Claudia, competed with Watterson, beat the shit out of Ashley Yoder, good against Lupumi. The Lemos fight, I still think she won personally. So obviously looked good against Godinez in the last fight where a lot of people were writing her off. So to me, it's just a big step up in caliber of striking. And so to me, it's kind of like the burden of proof is on Ducote. Theoretically, she could wrestle, but she really never wrestles overall. And in fact, usually the floor has been how she's lost the majority of fights in her career. And I know we had the Jandiroba fight for Hill, but then, despite Godinez not shooting a ton of takedowns against Hill, her get-ups in the times that takedowns were shot looked really good. And I would say Godinez is a much better offensive wrestler than Emily Ducote by probably a significant margin. So ultimately, I come away saying a pick'em doesn't really make much sense. I think Hill should be like 60% here, but I anticipate it to be a competitive fight. I just don't think a pick'em is fair and it's disrespectful to Hill.
Yeah, the irony is I agree with like 90% of what you just said, like literally, but I like the other side. And like, my thing is, I mean, everything you said about who they fought level wise is 100% accurate. Ducote's fought, I don't want to say she's fought no one. I would say for someone coming to the UFC, she had fought a better than average regional competition, but nonetheless, none of them are on Hill's level really. Obviously, Penne was more an IQ test than anything else. My issue is I actually like Ducote striking a lot. I know you do as well. I think she's fairly sharp on the counter. Obviously, her calf kicks are good. And, she showed an ability volume-wise in the Penne fight that I really hadn't seen from her before that really impressed me. I mean, I know it's Jessica Penne, but still, one of my big bugaboos with Ducote was always, I felt like she was a little too willing to let people get off volume on her. And she didn't there. And so, like, I'm looking at this fight and going through Angela Hill's career, it's like Angela Hill is like the queen of fighting close with everybody, no matter who it is, pretty much, outside of Ashley Yoder, who she obviously killed. But it's like Angela Hill got outlanded the distance by Michelle Watterson, got outlanded that distance by Luffy, got outlanded the distance by Lemos. I mean, that's more forgivable because Lemos is like top 5, but lost a mostly striking-based fight to Claudia Gadelha. I didn't think she lost personally, but again, either way, late in that fight, she lost a round 3 to Claudia on the feet. And so, like, I look at it and I'm like, well, the optimal end of Hill for me is very likely a very close decision. Like, it's very, very hard for me to imagine a scenario where Hill runs away with this fight in any capacity. I think it's probably fairly close if she's winning this fight. And on the other side, it's like for the first thing, it's like I think Ducote is one of the few females in that division who carries. Look, she doesn't carry like Lemos level power, but she hits fairly hard for a woman. She has a bunch of KOs regionally. She stung Penne a few times in that fight. Obviously, she kicks very hard. And so when I'm thinking about it, it's like I think most of the moment upside is very likely on the Ducote side. We just saw, I don't think Hill's chinny or anything like that, don't get me wrong, but we did just see her get rocked last fight by Loopy, who I don't really think is a huge hitter. And so I think the vast majority of the finishing equity, both on the mat and on the feet here, even though I think it's small, but is on the Ducote side. I think when you look at the cardio dynamic, it's like we just see Angela Hill, she fades in almost every single fight. Like, yeah, she won round 3 of her last fight, but Loopy was completely gassed out in round 3 of that fight. So it's like, how much stock do I want to put in that? I'm not sure. But I do favor Ducote in round 3 somewhat heavily, to be honest. She's been 5 rounds before. And round 1 and 2, I'm kind of expecting to be close. So it's like, for me, between the cardio edge, between the fact that I think Ducote has more moment upside and finish upside, and the fact that I just don't think Hill has really much ability to separate here on minutes, I just kind of had to make Ducote like minus 150 to minus 185. Again, not the most passionate take ever. And it's, I don't bet spots like this often just because, as you said, Luke, it is a huge step up in competition. Like, I could be wrong and she just comes out here and gets clowned, but I rate her striking a fair amount here. And so I favor Ducote a bit. I have a small bet on her. But we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. I mean, Angie's my girl, so if she wins, I won't be the most upset ever. Moving on, though, interesting fight here. We got Nico Price taking on Phil Rowe. Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, this is the one fight on the card that I don't really have much of an opinion on, to be honest. Nico Price, kind of another guy that's been a bit all over the board. Obviously fought a much better brand of competition, but obviously has his own defensive issues. Like I said, he's won a lot of fights on the feet. He's killed a lot of guys on the feet, but he's also lost the exchanges. He's got hurt at multiple points. And the one thing that for Price that was kind of more of a negative going back and watching tape is like, why did he have like so many issues with Cerrone and Oliveira? Like at this point in both of their careers, like, not only did he have general issues, like he couldn't finish both of those guys either. It's like a guy who, historically is known for going out there and, going absolutely buck wild and killing people. It's like you can't finish an aged double cowboy, I should say. So that's kind of concerning. But on the Rowe side, he has all the like intangibles and attributes that you like. The guy's, a freakishly long dude, black belt in jiu-jitsu, hits hard. The problem is he starts slow in every fight. He just pretty much gives away the first round. It's like he's one of those guys that like has to essentially, get hit or have things happen against him before he's like, oh, I'm in a fight and now I'm going to go and fight now. It's like, I don't think that's a great characteristic to have against Nico Price, who, like I said, there's been some flakiness at points sometimes, but a guy who's going to go out there and, for better or worse, more or less, go out there and chuck his hands, who does have power. We still can't really unsee Rowe getting hurt by the shitty Shabazian brother, like, losing early to, Jason Witt, gets his calves chewed to shit by Gabe Green, loses the first round against one of the shitty Kosies, like, but when he's on and he starts ticking and he starts firing away those big shots and really is on his bike, it's pretty to watch, man. It's just, hey, Phil, can you do that consistently? Can you not get hurt? Can you not get taken down consistently, have bad takedown defense, not be able to get up? And that's the one thing I will say, like, despite the guy being a black belt, he hasn't really proven to be dangerous at all in the UFC, at least. That's I'm not saying he's a bad grappler or anything. I'm just saying so far from what we've seen from on bottom, hasn't proven to be like crazy dangerous. So there's that. Obviously, you're not going to get like a ton of offensive wrestling upside from him either. So I don't know. To me, you got a lot of flakiness between both guys. I know I've seen a ton of people say they really like Phil Rowe. It's like, for me, based on the history of Phil Rowe, I'd much rather just bet him live after the first round until he proves to me against a decent level of competition he can go out there and not just fuck around for 5 minutes. That's just my take. And the last thing I'll say with Price, though, that does need to be noted, he is coming off of like a complete reconstructive knee surgery, like ACL, MCL, LCL, like within the last year. So it's like, that was because his last fight was, I think, right around this time last year as well. It's like, that's a pretty big overall surgery to have, and then also come back within a year-ish or so from that. From a narrative perspective, I don't know how great that is for Price either, but yeah, ultimately my large point, massive pass for me.
Yeah, so it's funny because I like when I initially saw the matchup, and like when I saw Price was a dog at first, I was like, I mean, I'm definitely gonna bet Price. The guy's fought everybody, he's got a million more fights, Rowe's been hurt before. And then like you tape it and it's like, man, Nico Price at this stage really isn't like good at anything other than hurting people. Yeah, like I'm not even like kidding. You watch it and
is he even good at that anymore?
Right. Exactly. Like when was the last time you hurt somebody? Like it's like Luke, you mentioned the Cowboy fight, and we didn't realize it at the time because this was right before this was the start of that horrible streak for Cowboy. But like Cowboy was washed to bits, and he looked pretty bad in that fight. Price, I'm saying he looked horrible against Pereira until Pereira gassed, and even when he gassed, it was like, Price couldn't even track him down really. Like people are putting stock in him, like getting takedowns against Brazilian Cowboy, and it's like, man, Brazilian Cowboy literally is like older than the sun at this point. Like there's just, I don't know. I think Price's game has deteriorated quite a bit, and like you touched on the ACL and MCL injury. I got to share with. I don't know if you guys saw the video he posted on his Instagram. Someone shared it with me, but like there's a video of him kicking pads on it in his gym, and like, I mean, it's dead serious. He's not like joking, and it is interesting to watch.
To be fair, I will add though, it was from June. That's the only thing. But yeah, no. The clip is not pretty.
And that's the other thing. Like, he's not even really training at a real gym anymore. My understanding is he's training at his own gym. The clip is pretty brutal. And then you look at Rowe, and like Luke, I share all the same concerns that you do. The two big concerns I have are, one, the calf kicks. But Price he throws a lot of calf kicks, but he's not really, a heavy calf kicker per se. And the other thing is I just get worried about how high Rowe keeps his chin in the air. Like you've seen him get hurt when guys have blitzed him before, like Gabe Green, the bad Shabazian. And so against a guy like Price, that is a concern. But in terms of skills, like I think Rowe is the better boxer by a fairly large margin here. I think he might hit harder. I think defensively he's better. And in the grappling, I mean, dude, Nico Price's grappling is awful. Like, rewatching, like, I went through a few of his fights to just, like, check out what he was like on bottom. Like, rewatching the way Jeff Neal violated him on the mat. And I love Jeff Neal, but let's be real. Like, if you're getting ruined by him on the mat, you're not a good grappler. I think Rowe, do I trust Rowe to go proactively to the grappling? Not really, but I do think if Nico takes him down, like we did see Rowe do a pretty good job against Gabe Green of, getting to an underhook and kind of reversing position to get on top. I think if Rowe gets on top of him, it's going to be bad news. Again, it's kind of a spot that I don't usually like to target because I usually like to bet guys like Price who have a much better edge in competition and more experience. But I think Price is kind of done. Even at his peak, he really was kind of just a janky guy with a ton of power. Now it's like you said, Lags, is his power even still there anymore? I don't know, but we know Rose is. And so I think you have to make Rowe a small favorite here. Like I've made him like minus 125. Like it's not, there is enough concerns with Price's ability to cause chaos that I don't really want to have like a big bet on Rowe, but I think I'm probably going to have a small poke. What do you think, Lags?
Yeah, it's a fight I really don't want anything to do with, quite frankly. But to add on top of that point with the injuries, like Price before the injuries was slow as fuck, quite frankly. And so
yeah,
I think the speed advantage for Rowe, as somebody pointed to in the chat, it is quite massive here. So I think it's a battle of the speed versus the power. So we shall see.
Yeah, go Phil Rowe. Moving on, Lags, I'll throw it to you here. We got Eric Anders taking on Kyle Daukaus. What are your thoughts?
So I actually did bet Eric Anders before the podcast. Quite frankly, I'm just not a big fan of Daukaus. I mean, I think his striking's okay. It's nothing great. Dude, kind of hittable. His wrestling's not that good. I think he's going to have quite a struggle, I should say. Sorry, kind of get my words here, quite a struggle getting Eric Anders down and keeping him down. So I think Eric just makes it a close fight. I mean, the dude, I think, can bully him in terms of the grappling, in terms of the clinch work here, and the striking. He hits harder, even though he is low volume usually himself. Daukaus isn't a guy who just throws a ton of volume himself either. So yeah, plus 185. I'm in on Eric Anders.
Luke, how about you?
It's another weird fight. I do think it's a dogger pass situation personally, just because we haven't seen a ton of Daukaus at distance. I think like mechanically what he's shown, I think it's looked decent, but his defense really isn't there. And like I said, we still haven't seen a ton of it. We've seen him hurt multiple times. Anders actually has pushed a bit more of a pace in recent years. That I would say that's still always been my issue with him, is that he just tends to not do enough. And it very well still could be the case here, but I think I think one thing that's very definitive here is that Anders is much more durable than Kyle Daukaus. So I do think the power and finish equity from that perspective lies with Anders, and I do favor him on the feet. Anders obviously has really good takedown defense historically. Daukaus isn't the greatest wrestler in the world, but he is obviously a much better grappler, in my opinion, than Anders. And I know it's going to sound like kind of a dumb comparison. I mean, I took a shot on Anders against Nunes, which turned out to be like absolutely terrible. Because I kind of took like a similar approach where I was like, I mean, Nunes doesn't throw anything on the feet. Anders has pretty good takedown defense. If he stays upright, he wins this fight clean. He goes up there and gets taken down like right away in the middle. Obviously, my point being though, Nunes is obviously a very high level jiu-jitsu guy, but is Nunes still like anything phenomenal as a wrestler? Like, I don't know about that necessarily. And Daukaus, I think, is pretty good transitionally. And some of the things I noticed with Anders, like even if he stuffs, like there's times where guys still can get to his back transitionally, and he kind of leaves his neck there for front chokes. And we know that lanky, lanky white boy and Doc is gonna attack some front headlock stuff at the same time too. So, yeah, I think Anders is pretty live to get submitted if he does get stuck in some tricky spots. But yeah, at this price though, I think you could only really go Anders. I actually think the under is a decent look too.
Yeah, two guys who are less than the sum of their parts to me. Daukaus, like you said, like I think his boxing looks good when he's at range. Like his boxing looks better than Eric Anders, but it's like his general approach is I'm going to spam 3 shots and then dive into the clinch against you, which we have seen him get in trouble when he's fought some guys who are pretty good in the clinch. And Anders, that is one of the places he's stronger. Anders on the other side, like I've always been a fan of him. Like he's a decent grappler. He's obviously got power. He's obviously a good athlete. But as you mentioned, the story of his career has been not doing enough. Now he's been better about it lately, but again, it's still always a concern I'm going to have in the back of my head. And like thinking about this fight, I don't really have a great read on it because I do think, if you told me in 5 years that Kyle Daukaus was like a top 12 guy at 85, I wouldn't be shocked. And if you told me in a year he's out of the UFC, I also wouldn't be shocked. Like, I think he's got a lot of really good tools and he just hasn't figured out how to use them. And some guys never figure it out. But yeah, with that said, I haven't bet it yet. I've thought about it. If it goes over plus 200, I might. But I think it's dog or pass. It's just like Daukaus is going to kind of give Anders the fight he needs, historically anyway. Daukaus can make improvements, but it's a pretty quick turnaround. Like, does that mean I favor Anders? No. I think Daukaus skill-wise is better, so I do make him a favorite. But, I mean, I don't know. Would you guys be totally shocked if Anders got, 3 takedowns and ended up riding out top position here? Like, Daukaus does have good sweeps, but, I wouldn't be.
No, I think the strength disparity is quite big.
Yeah.
I think it would be stupid for him to do that personally.
Yeah. My concern is just him on the feet. It's like, he gets into that little, I'm going to do the jab, sit here, pop a left, reset. And we're going to do that about 7 times over the course of 15 minutes. And that's going to be it. But yeah, I mean, Daukaus just doesn't really at this stage anyway, unless he's fighting someone like Jamie Pickett, doesn't really have a minus 200 set of skills, you know?
And my last thing there is, I mean, Daukaus swept Phil Hawes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. He had gassed out in that fight, which was kind of weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm passing it for now, but I'm not opposed to potentially betting Anders. Moving on, we got the Joker, Jack Hermansson, taking on Dolildze. What are your thoughts, Luke?
Another interesting fight. My general breakdown is I think Dolildze is probably KO or bust here. I don't really think he wins minutes on Jack on the feet personally, just because historically Dolildze is incredibly low volume. Jack's shown a very consistent work rate. Really the only guys to go out there and really outwork him on the feet, you know, were guys like Strickland and Vettori, who are obviously top tier guys in the division who have crazy paces. And that was also over 5 rounds. We just obviously saw Hermansson go out there, stay safe against Curtis, fight an intelligent game plan, keep a higher work rate. So there's that. Problem is Jack has been brutally knocked out before. Vettori did drop him early. It's kind of been the bigger power puncher archetypes, I would say, that have also given, you know, Hermansson troubles in the past, which is what Roman Dolildze is. And he's definitely obviously been a guy who's went out there and played spoiler in his last 2 as a pretty big dog in both and kind of exercised that nuclear option. So there's that. But honestly, you guys will have to let me know what your opinion on this, at least in terms of the grappling. I still, maybe I'm just categorically wrong about this and this ages terribly. I do not think Dolildze is a very good wrestler, and I don't think he's a very good grappler. I know he hurt Hawes with the heel hook or whatever, but this is what I pose. One, is he going to want to be accepting takedowns against Jack Hermansson? Hermansson has some of the most nasty ground and pound and top game in the division, who's also accomplished in leg locks, might I add too. So if he's going to sit there, be pulling and accepting stuff, I still think a lot of people don't realize this because, you know, the recent fights of Hermansson, you kind of have to go back a little bit further, but Hermansson on top is fucking elite, man.
Serious.
Like, you don't want to have that guy on top. So people like continue to talk about this Dolildze leg lock thing. I will pay somebody $50 who comments something in the chat right now if he heel hooks or even hurts Hermansson with a heel hook at some point in this fight. I don't think it's happening. I would legitimately be shocked. And then, you know, like Dolildze goes out there and grinds out a guy like Staropoli, because Staropoli can't go out there and defend a body lock. Like, Hermansson's got really good scrambling. Anytime he's been taken down, that's probably actually been one of the better parts of his games. He just out hustles guys. And I don't think that's going to work here on the Dolildze side from like a minute winning or offensive wrestling standpoint, coupled with the fact that guy's coming in on 2 weeks notice and has been a gas bag to begin with when you have a guy in Hermansson who's going to push a high pace in both realms. So it's a good spot for Jack. But once again, when you factor in other party that has a nuclear option, he could kill him. He could kill him at some point. It is definitely in play here. But this is definitely a favorite or pass spot in my opinion.
Yeah, so the line's actually coming in a bit. I see BetOnline's got minus 175 now. I actually bet Hermansson before the pod at minus 180. To your point, Luke, honestly, if Roman tries to go for a heel hook against Shaq, he is going to smash his face in. Like that is like, you know, at what Trevin Giles did to him is going to feel like a Swedish massage compared to like what Jack will do to him if he tries to play that game here. Honestly, like, to a degree, I respect Roman's game because like one of the things I used to take for granted is like the ability to finish guys, you know. I used to refer to every finish as random, but it's like that's not really the case. You know, having, you know, innate finishing ability is a valuable asset. And obviously, you know, that is Roman's valuable asset because honestly, I think the rest of his game is shit. Like pretty much everywhere. Like you go back, even watch the John Alon fight. Alon wins that fight if he doesn't get headbutted in the first round. Like literally was winning the first round, gets headbutted. No one. Jerry Curry with a good comment here. No, but literally, he gets headbutted. Nobody mentions the headbutt. The referee doesn't mention it. Everybody thinks it's a knockdown. He probably wins the fight if that doesn't happen. Like your point, the Staropoli fight just clinched him. That's not going to happen here. The Giles fight, he lost. I didn't think he was looking particularly good until he shredded Dolildze's knee. I don't know, or not Dolildze, Hawes' knee. Honestly, I think Jack's better everywhere here. I think he's the better wrestler. I think if he gets on top, it's going to be bad news. And I think if he ends up on, while I don't think Roman will take him down, I think if Jack ends up on bottom, he's more than a good enough grappler to get it to, either reverse position or get back up. And I don't know what you guys think, but Roman seems very slow to me, his hands. I do not think, the power could pose a problem if you caught him, but I don't really think that's very likely that he catches him. The speed difference is going to be huge. They're in a big cage, which seems particularly relevant on the feet. I don't see really any reason that Jack can't do the exact same thing he just did to Curtis last fight here. Roman's bad at cutting off the cage, much like Curtis is. No surprise, they were teammates. I mean, maybe there's something there. Look, Jack's the far more tested fighter. And I think the reason nobody knows about his ground and pound, Luke, as you mentioned, it's look at the guys Jack has been fighting, in the last couple years. This is an enormous step down in competition. I think he's going to win the fight everywhere. You do have to build into your capping of this fight a fair amount of Roman memes him and finishes him because that's kind of his game. But I think Jack's got to be 70% here, in my opinion. So I bet him. I think he's going to take care of business. What do you think, Legs?
It's funny because kind of what Jared said in the comments is kind of how I'm feeling right now after a guy who bet Phil Hawes in the last fight and came on the podcast saying the same thing, saying Roman is KO or bust. He's not a minute winner. He won't be. They're pretty moment reliant, and that's kind of it. And then goes out there, snaps up Phil's leg, and then knocks him out shortly after. I don't really disagree with any of your points here. Just kind of for me, it's just more of a setback. A little scarred a little bit. But the thing is too, and why I shouldn't be scarred, and why I should just go back to the well here, quite frankly.
This is where you double down, Legs.
Honestly,
they want you to jump ship right now. They want you to jump ship. This is the spot. But
add on top of that too, because the cardio nature. I mean, this is a short notice fight for Dolildze, of a guy who you talked about was already slow before. Cardio is not great. Yeah. But yep.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at
That's
that.
why you bet Jack here. That's why you bet Jack here.
May or may not be on Hermansson by Saturday. We shall see.
How is Jack being priced the same as what Phil Hawes was being priced against?
And that's what I need to know. No, and that's where I'm at as well, because if I'm laying 165 on Hawes, how am I not laying 180 on Jack?
I agree. I agree completely. Yep. War Hermansson.
Yep.
Hopefully it doesn't end in tears. That would be really tragic, honestly. I love Jack too. Moving on though, banger here. Tuivasa, Sergey Pavlovich. I don't know how to feel about this because I've never been the biggest fan of Ty's game, just because it's not very technical. He's not a very good grappler, but he has enormous power. He throws down. He's got good leg kicks. And at the end of the day, whether I'm a fan of his game or not, the guy has found a way to win fights in the top 10 in the UFC. On paper, I think Pavlovich is the better striker here. He's probably the harder hitter. He's a better athlete. He's got better cardio. But man, I mean, I really don't want to bet Ty, but the price is getting to a point where it's just we've seen Sergey Pavlovich. It's going to be a swinging match. That's what every fucking Sergey Pavlovich fight is. Can Tai Tuivasa really be near plus 200 in a swinging match? Maybe against Francis, but against Sergey Pavlovich? I don't know. I do think skill-wise the line is justified, but just given, the intangibles between leg kicks and power that Tai has and his speed, it's very hard for me to understand how it's plus 200. I haven't bet it, but I'm thinking about it if it keeps getting wider. Legs, what do you think?
So I know we were talking about this a little bit during the week. So I know do you think Ty has better durability?
Probably not. It's possible.
I think that's where I'm at. I think where there's durability question marks on the Pavlovich side, and I'm not going to say he does have better durability. I would strongly say that Ty has significantly worse durability. I mean, the guy gets wobbled by Greg Hardy.
Yeah, fair.
That's fair. So point. I'm not, again, the under 1.5 open minus 190. I mean, I think this is a striker's delight. Obviously, somebody's getting knocked out early here. I think Sergey puts him down in the first round.
Luke, what do you think?
So in regards to like the durability thing that you guys were just talking about, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, Ty's been hurt and knocked out before. It's like, sure. But I think we also have to like really factor in one, the sample time. And I think we also have to factor in the strength of competition too. Like even I understand he gets hurt by Greg Hardy. Well, Greg Hardy's still 6'5" and cuts to ins like 300 pounds, who was killed. That was what he was doing in his heyday. He hits you with a good shot, you know. Which Ty still, by the way, recovered and then killed him. It's not like he actually got knocked out, but hurt. I get it. And so, but my overall point is like, when has Pavlovich faced any sort of volume or adversity ever?
Over him who killed him?
Well, in the clinch, more or less,
yeah.
and on the ground. But I'm saying like at distance, he's kind of just been given the exact type of fight he needs and has fought bad guys like Marcelo Gome, Maurice Green, who's got one eye smoking Newports now. Shamil, they shipped him in a cargo container back to Russia after like his last 5 cancellations. And then we don't know if Derek Lewis, you know, whether he wants to show up or not. Obviously, Lewis hits very hard. That was the question going into that. He was able to bonk Lewis, but fucking Ty went out there and finished Derek Lewis as well. So it's another fight that I kind of used this like term a couple times during these breakdowns. Like, where does the burden of proof lie here? Like you said it right off the jump, John. This is more than likely going to be a swinging contest. Ty Tuivasa, who has knockdowns in 8 of his 12 fights, knockdowns in 3 of 4 fights that he's lost, meaning he still lost the fight, but he's had at least a moment, you know, in 3 of those fights that he's lost, on a guy who has faced no volume. We don't know if he can check kicks. We don't know what his cardio is like. And I know people say that he went 25 minutes on the regionals. That fight was fought at a snail's pace. The other guy threw no strikes at him, and he barely threw any strikes himself. So like his cardio is questionable to me as well. His durability is questionable. Can he win overextending striking exchanges? I don't know. What is his durability like? I don't know. If he does get hurt, does he handle adversity, or does he just take his ball and go home? I don't know. I understand the guy's massive and like looks like he's built in the lab. Most likely is on every single supplement in the world. But it's like, to me, this guy has proved absolutely nothing to me other than he's big and he hits hard. Granted, it's heavyweight and that's all you need for a lot of these guys. I get it, but I think Ty's going to test him. Assuming Ty does not die on the first exchange, we are going to most likely learn a little bit more about Sergey Pavlovich in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because it's like what is Pavlovich's like potential hypothetical upside here? If he checked every box, yes, which is unlikely, but let's say the answer to every question was yes, he can do that. Is it past what the line is right now? You know?
Because he could still hurt Ty, and Ty could survive.
And Ty could still hurt him. Yeah. You know, even if he like that's my thing. And it's like I almost, the more I think about it, it's just like, and after listening to you, it's just like, what is like, I don't know that it's even possible for Pavlovich to be more than minus 200 here. And there are probably outcomes where it's closer, or I shouldn't say outcomes. It's not impossible that this is more like an evens fight. You know.
I personally put it closer to evens. I think both guys hit hard. They're going to swing, and we know we at least have more knowns on Ty. We have complete unknowns on this guy that are very concerning. I wouldn't want to say concerning because we don't know, but very valid, viable questions to ask when you're fighting Ty fucking Tuivasa that we don't know about, and we know what Ty's going to do. That's another thing with Ty. Ty is going to be a good soldier. He's going to go out there and fight for your money. He's not going to lay any fucking duds. If he goes out on a shield, it's like, you know what you're getting into, but it's like 2 big boys that are now top 5 in the division who are going to swing. This is a pretty easy bet for value-based bet for me to make on Ty.
Yeah. I mean, I can't disagree. I'm probably going to do it as well. I think we send Ty. Hopefully it works out. Moving on, cool fight. Matthews, Nicolau, Matt Schnell. Any thoughts here, Lex?
Honestly, no, not really. Other than I think the line's a bit wide, just because I do think that Nicolau's a bit of a slow starter. He's not particularly high volume. He's not a guy who's just going to be diving on legs either. So I think this has some scope for it to be close, but I rate Nicolau pretty highly as a fighter overall. So I think sizable, justified favorite against Schnell's fine, but it's 4-1 getting there, quite frankly.
Luke, what do you think?
I think it's wide just because of the margins that Nicolau fights in. And don't get me wrong, I'll preface by saying I love Nicolau. I think he's incredibly well-rounded. He's very talented technically in everywhere, I would say, by and large. But at flyweight, he lands less than 4 significant strikes per minute. He lands less than 2 takedowns per 15 minutes, and he goes backwards for large chunks of his fights. In a high-paced division, I'm not, enthralled with that. Now, listen, I get it. He's went out there and, beat, since coming back to the UFC, he's went out there and beat 3, really solid top 10, top 15 type of guys. But if you do go back and watch those fights, the margins in those fights were not wide. I think there's a valid argument to be made. He lost the cop fight, and that was someone who had a decent sized play on Nicolau in that fight. But if I'm being objective, he definitely, you throw that in another state, Nicolau loses that fight to Cop. Granted, I think all of those guys that he's fought recently are better than Schnell, personally, but it just doesn't change the fact of this is how he's fighting. And because if he's going to fight that way and not finish, he's going to have tighter margins on fights that hit the scorecards. And what I will say with Schnell is I think technically he's actually a pretty decent boxer, but we obviously know the chin concerns with him. He can be pretty much taken down whenever. We obviously know he's dangerous with his, triangles and stuff from his back, but I don't think he's submitting Nicolau here. I think Nicolau could easily out-wrestle and be completely fine in the guard. But if Schnell's going to go out there, be an agent of chaos, and he doesn't get finished, I guess, let me put it that way. If Nicolau does not finish Schnell, I would not feel good about having Nicolau minus 400 or something. If you're more on that side, I'd say just play the under, play Nicolau inside the distance, something like that. Against anybody who's top 15, it's hard for me to say that Nicolau covers minus 400 over 15 minutes against most guys in the top 15.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm not really dying to play Schnell just because I do kind of think that theoretically Nicolau might just have a safety valve here with the grappling, where it's Schnell does play guard, and I don't really think Nicolau is getting held or going to be threatened much off of Schnell from bottom. I agree. If it blew out to plus 400, I think I'd play Schnell just because I think at that point you have to. I'm not going to add a ton more. I guess my question to you guys, I'm thinking about the over. Obviously, playing overs in Schnell fights is a scary prospect, but it's at the end of the day, it's an 125-pound fight, and you guys both just touched on it. Nicolau is horribly low volume, and he also doesn't get hit a whole lot. So it's while Schnell can hit hard, it's Nicolau is going to do everything in his power to not engage, and they're at 125 pounds. Is that crazy? I kind of think this should be wider.
My devil's advocate back to that, though, if you do like the over, doesn't Schnell have value at plus 300?
Definitely.
This is what we're talking about with Elkins, too. It's the same thing, John.
I know. But God, it's just I've been trying to avoid some of these dogs that just feel not traps. I don't think Schnell's a trap by any means, right. But that have remote chances to win. But I mean, did you bet Schnell, Luke?
No, because I don't trust his chin. I do think Nicolau does hit hard, and I think he has grappling.
So that's my other question is how hard, because Nicolau has hurt a bunch of guys.
Hurt Dvorak bad in the last fight.
Twice, yeah. And he almost committed a homicide against Louis Smolka. Yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking about it.
You're going to need your blood pressure meds for that over.
Yeah. Maybe we just stick with one sweaty over. I don't know. We'll see.
One thing I will say, though, the fight could look, when I was going back and watching it, I was saying, the fight could look a lot like when Bontorin fought Schnell. And that's how it goes over. But
I don't think the over 1.5 here is plus 180. Uncle Tom.
It's 240.
No. Yeah, the over
Minus
1.5 is 240. Yeah. We're on the Schnell fight.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the Bonter and Schnell going over, I'm pretty sure I bet under on that fight. That was
I bet the under as well.
Yeah, that was absolutely sickening. Moving on, though, we got a weird co-main event here. It's kind of, I mean, it's a good fight, but in a card that's got so many good fights, it's such an odd selection for co-main. We got Rafael dos Anjos taking on Brian Barberena. What do you think, Luke?
Not much to say here for me. I think it's a horrible fight for Barberena. I think Dos Anjos is better than him pretty much everywhere. It's probably his biggest step down in competition in like 5-ish or so years, maybe like almost ever. But there's the obvious talking points with RDA is that, he's 38 years old now. Definitely not a spring chicken, probably not a title contender, but like you always have to be like wary about like these older guys, but like at the same time, like I haven't really seen like any evident decline from RDA really, like maybe outside of the fact that, yeah, he's not a title contender anymore, but he's still shown that he's like a top 15 fighter. I know he's going up here. But I think he's I think he's a better boxer. I think he has a pretty clear path to victory on the ground with the wrestling. I would actually say, I guess, let me know your guys' opinion on this. I think that RDA is the best combo wrestler grappler that Barberena has fought to date. I know Barberena fought Colby, who's a really strong wrestler, but Colby hasn't been much of like a submission threat or jiu-jitsu guy. But, to play even slight devil's advocate against myself, when, we're now getting into like the minus 600 or so range, Barberena, isn't an easy guy to finish. He is going to throw strikes. He is historically tough to get out of there. And he's going to come to fight. So, you do have to take that, into account that Barberena isn't really a guy that folds over unless it's like late in the third round from like attritional damage, right? But I still think skill-wise in Barberena, even though he's 33, the guy's legitimately talking about retirement. And how he doesn't want to do this anymore. He's had a ton of surgeries. So people look at the age difference between the two. Brian Barberena has an ass load of MMA miles on him at 33. He's probably closer to 40 in fight years, to be honest, as well. So I think it's a good spot for RDA if as long as RDA doesn't like just get into like a complete like slugfest with him. Like if he fights calculated, high volume, mixes in his wrestling, I mean, he should really fuck Barberena up, in my opinion.
Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, no, not much more to add, quite frankly. I think RDA should fuck him up. I was actually looking at, not that I am playing, but I was looking at RDA inside the distance, which was plus 180. But
I don't have a ton to add. I guess the one thing that popped out when I was looking to fight is like Barberena, historically very good get-up game, but kind of like what you touched on, Luke. It's like he's had a good get-up game, but he hasn't really fought anybody with the top game that RDA has in his entire career. So it's like, do I really trust him to get up here? Not really. Like the one consideration is that like the line is enormous here. And it's like, well, RDA's 38 going back up to welterweight. Maybe he gasses out here. Maybe he just shows up done. But kind of to your point, Luke, like I've bet Barberena in like 2 of his last 3 fights. But like I bet him big against Darian Weeks and was like he should absolutely kill Darian Weeks, and that was a sweaty fucking fight. Like I think Barberena is he's pretty close to done, man. He's pretty shot worn. I know RDA maybe too, but I've seen much better recent performances from RDA than him.
Barberena couldn't even knock out Matt Brown, bro.
Believe me, I sweated my ass off there. Like that is like should he be 85%? I don't know. But like Barberena is going to give up the takedowns quite easily. I had looked at the over, but again, it's like if the RDA is actually minus 550, and if the takedowns come easy and he can consolidate, I'm not really sure I want to be holding on to a minus 185 over 2.5 here, to be honest. So it's a pass all the way around. I hope it's fun, but I suspect it's just going to be, RDA mauling him. Moving on, good main event here. Wonderboy Thompson, probably his last fight, or one of his last fights here, taking on Kevin Holland. Holland's blown out the favorite at like minus 160 now. Lags, any thoughts? Wonderboy Live, what do you think?
Great fight, great main event. I know we were talking about this a long time ago, and I was like, oh yeah, it's got to be Kevin Holland, right? And I'm kind of like, well, it's probably going to be a close fight, even though I do favor like the length, the athleticism, the speed of Holland. I don't know, man. They could just have this kind of like sparring back and forth kind of sparring fight, and so like that's kind of why I was actually looking more towards the over 3.5 with that plus money, or the starts around 4 around even money, or pick 'em odds, I should say. But yeah, I have no play on the fight, but I lean more so on the Holland side. I think the age and the declining durability is really catching up to Thompson.
Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Holland, I capped him like 150 personally, like slight favorite. I think that makes sense. Honestly, primarily more than anything for finishing upside. I just think he's based on, youth power. It's clearly translated down at 170. He's a pretty big guy there. But I mean, I understand, to play devil's advocate even against that, despite, Thompson being older, like minute to minute, nobody really goes out there and outstrikes Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, like people have hurt him, but like exchange to exchange, like it's always either competitive or he's usually winning, right? Like I said, outside of really being hurt. So it's like, and that's over a very long sample size against really good guys. So it's like, I don't really want to lay favorite money against Wonderboy in that, especially, extended if Holland doesn't finish him or there's not any big moments. Like this could be a 50-50 type of fight. It's obviously with the wrestling concerns on both sides, but neither of them are going to wrestle most likely. They should give each other the type of fight they want. So, yeah, I think Holland a slight favorite is fair. I mean, but still, to even lay now, I mean, it's all the way up to minus 170 for Holland at Bet Online. Like, honestly, I think if you're laying that type of number against Thompson, you pretty much have to make the automatic conclusion that he's like really done, right? Like, which is entirely possible, but like I said, even his last 2 fights where he's losing, it's because he's just getting ran on the ground. Like, there's still nothing to suggest that he can't be competitive minute to minute. But like I said, the favorite or the finishing upside lies with Holland. But I am good. I'm not laying moderate chalk against Wonderboy Thompson.
Yeah, I don't really think Holland has much. I mean, I guess he could land a couple takedowns, but I don't think Holland has the gas to come out here and wrestle the way Bilal did. And like I saw, I was talking to a couple people who were like, maybe Holland sub, and it's like, I mean, Bilal and Burns couldn't sub Wonderboy. I really don't think Holland's going to sub him. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys. Look, bottom line is he's a lot younger, he's bigger, and he's much taller, and he's much longer, and he's a lot faster, and hits harder. But what I ultimately think is very likely to happen here is this could very much devolve into kind of a staring counter fight, because it's like Holland kind of likes to counter as well. And I don't think Wonderboy is going to be able to jab him, really, to be honest. And so I kind of think, unless Holland gets overly aggressive, but Holland's not usually like hyper aggressive standing. Like I kind of think it's going to be like, would you be shocked if it was a repeat of the Till fight to a respect? Like I kind of think
that's why I like the overs.
Yeah, I kind of do too.
And even I was just looking at the alternate overs here because I was only looking at the 3.5. The 2.5 is at minus 135.
Yeah, I don't. Wait, 2.5 is minus 135.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, I think there's a very high likelihood that this, Wonderboy is the kind of guy that throughout his career, he'll unless you come at him hard, he puts on a boring fight. If you have a guy like Luque at him who just comes at him like a berserker, yeah, he lets his hands go and lights them up. But if you have someone who plays the range game with him, like Holland seems pretty likely to do, they tend to just be staring contests. So like I'm kind of with Lags. I haven't bet it, but I'm thinking about the over, and I'm also kind of thinking about Holland decision plus 400. Like Wonderboy. Holland's is super durable. I really don't think Thompson's going to finish him, and I mean, if you guys disagree, feel free to say so. But I kind of think if it goes the distance, it's probably a pretty close fight, might even lean the Thompson side of things. So, I mean, that feels extreme to me. So yeah, I mean, I would lean with overs and by decision. I actually think this is potentially one of the most disappointing fights of the night.
Well, I think you also have to factor in the possibility that it's still Kevin Holland at the end of the day.
And that
just go out there and fight like a fucking idiot. Like
full guard.
There's still some of that stuff in there. And we were kind of joking about it before and saw some stuff on Twitter, like people like making the joke. But honestly, it's kind of possible. Like, could Holland like go out there, drop him with a straight right, and then help him back up to his feet? Like, I wouldn't be shocked. The motherfucker, he was on Thompson went on Holland's podcast like 2 weeks ago, and these guys are sitting there chit-chatting it up and being buddies and stuff. Like, I know that's completely like adjacent bullshit, but I wouldn't be like,
no, but like,
you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious. Jared asked, "What's this fight to go to split?" I'm not sure, but that's actually. I think did Tim say it was 12 and 14 to 1?
Give me a second there. I got you. So to go to split is 8 to 1. I have on DraftKings.
And what about to win by split?
That's yeah. Let me know. Or let me. Do they even have it up here?
Holland is plus 1,200. Thompson is plus 1,400.
Oh, there we go. My bad.
Yeah. Probably goes at a higher.
Actually, on DraftKings, they actually have both at 14 to 1 by split.
That's interesting.
So,
but yeah, guys, that'll do it for the show tonight. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Big slate. It's going to be a late card. I'm excited for it though. We'll be back next week, same exact time here. I am trying my hardest to figure out how to get this on Apple Podcasts. Running into some issues, but I will in the next week or two finally have us up on there. Yeah, come back at 7 p.m. next week. It's a great pay-per-view. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for coming by tonight. Good luck on your bets this weekend. As always, you got me, John, at MMA Fox, Lags at Danny_Lags, and Luke at SWR_betting. Guys, enjoy your bets this weekend. Please drop a like and subscribe if you like the show. We'll see you next week. Peace.